This is E.T., and this is a 19th century shirt. Now, when ground up and then supplemented with other materials in a mill, it produced by the 1830s an inexpensive paper. Now, that's for the first time in known history. It's all thanks to men such as Joshua Gilpin, about whom American school children today know, well, nothing. An immediate result of the new inexpensive paper was the introduction of cheap, and I mean that in both understandings of that word, cheap newspapers. The result was the introduction of hyped or overtly faked news, and the first of many 100% fabricated news stories was the infamous moon hoax. Now, this was published in several consecutive editions during the last week of August of 1835 by the New York Sun. That is the first mass circulation newspaper. The paper sold for a penny, thus making it affordable to most city residents, and it democratized the news. News that appeals to, well, the more prurient and sensational. This is Benjamin Day, founder, publisher of the New York Sun. He learned the printer's trade in an office in the Springfield, Massachusetts Republican. In 1833, during a financial dip, he began to publish his own newspaper, the New York Sun. The first edition was 4 small pages. In 1835, he could claim a circulation of nearly 20,000, and that is the largest in the world. This is the beginning of the age of mass communication. Now, Ben Day, during a week in late August of 1835, printed out that series of articles, allegedly reprinted from a Scottish scientific journal, describing a telescope and a discovery with it of life on the moon. It had detailed reports of spherical amphibians. There were blue goats with one horn, 2-legged beavers, and short, hairy men with bat wings. This is all the handiwork of a Sun reporter named Richard Adams Locke. Locke is a lineal descendant of John Locke. Locke was, along with Montesquieu, the political philosopher who most influenced the authors of the United States Constitution. The moon stories increased Day's circulation to that 20,000 mark. Now, Day, when it became obvious that these stories were untrue, urged, as he put it, every reader to examine it and enjoy his own opinion. He understood that he could sell a moon hoax one day and maybe retract it the next. Well, here are some details regarding that moon hoax story. The Sun's headline read thus: Great astronomical discoveries lately made by Sir John Herschel. The text of the story ran this way: Sir John Herschel, who was actually a world-famous astronomer, and at the time he's in South America, very far away from New York, that John Herschel established, said the story, he established a new theory of cometary phenomena, whatever that means. He went on to say he discovered planets in other solar systems, and that he solved or corrected nearly every leading problem of mathematical astronomy, and he did it by means of a telescope of vast dimension based on an entirely new principle. Then the Sun went on to report that Herschel found life on the moon. This includes forests, lakes, pyramids made of quartz, bison, unicorns, primitive tribes of fire-wielding biped beavers, and proto-humans, reported as Vespertilio Homo, or man-bat. Well, here are the facts. Herschel in South America never observed life on the moon. He never accomplished any of those astronomical breakthroughs reported in the article. He did not find out until months later about his name being used. The hoax story sold thousands of copies before the public realized that it was a hoax, and many found it, at least for a short time, to be plausible. Yale College had many believers, including the literati, the students and professors both, some with doctor's degrees in divinity and law. But the fact that a newspaper openly lied did not matter when people found out. The Sun's circulation continued to grow, as it did for many of the new penny dailies popping up here and there around the world. What mattered to the public was this: people were entertained, especially those people who wanted to believe something incredible, much as you and I today believe either this, or some variant in between is telling us a good story. So was the moon story actually ground zero for fake news? Well, it was, in the sense that nothing in the story was true. The renowned astronomer Sir John Herschel never made the claims attributed to him by the sun. There's no evidence of any life in any form on the moon. In virtually everything in the article, save the existence of Sir John, who was out of the country, was fabricated. But, and this is important, the moon story was so incredible that very few would have seen it as true had not Professor Herschel's name been attached. And those who did at first sort of believed the story, well, they tended to be people like those Yale students and professors who were vulnerable because they lived in a world of abstraction. It's all ideas, all theories. They were not bound by the harsh realities of everyday life. But the fact is, most of the readers of the story quickly determined that it was 100% false. An editorial in the New York Evening Post, this is after the first Sun story came out, immediately described the story as a hoax. The New York Commercial Advertiser said, and I'm quoting them, "We can hardly understand how any man of common sense could read it without at once perceiving the deception." And then within a few days, people with some knowledge of astronomy and math pointed out the impossibility of the story. For example, the moon's distance from the Earth is about 240,000 miles. Well, Locke, in the article, gives the lens of the telescope a power of 42,000 times. So if you divide 240,000, the miles between the moon and Earth, if you divide that by 42,000, you come up with 5. And that 5 represents the number of miles that you would be seeing above the moon. And no animal, according to one source, and I'm quoting, could be seen so far, much less the minor points particularized in the story. Let me put this another way. The moon story was entertainment, which most everybody quickly figured out. It just happened to be placed on the front page of a newspaper, but it was accompanied by other legitimate news stories, much in the same way as this publication can run this feature, but can also print this one, which turned out to be true. Well, this sensational story was unique as a fabricated news story that was consumed by a huge audience. It should not be assumed that so-called legitimate news stories from whatever source, whatever date, current or past. It should not be assumed that they represent objective truth, be they from early American pamphlets or today's TV chatting heads or a YouTube influencer, including me, or any of the much trusted old timers such as Walter Cronkite, Jack Anderson, who else? Walter Winchell, Henry Luce, who started Time magazine, Walter Lippmann. All of these and the rest had or have some axe to grind, some issue or candidate to promote or to attack. As early as the late 1700s, newspapers in the United States were financed and controlled by political factions that ground out their own fake stories. Example, the Gazette of the United States, which supported conservative causes. It was very pro-Alexander Hamilton. It began during the first year that George Washington was president. The purpose, it said on the masthead, was to endear the general government to the American people. And then there was its opposition, the National Gazette, very liberal in its day, radical according to some. Bias exists even in the selection of issues. Linguist Noam Chomsky wrote a while back, "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow a very lively debate within that spectrum." In other words, the stories that are chosen, it's already predetermined. E.T.'s point is this: the moon story was not the first fake news report for two reasons. Reason one, it was so obvious a joke that only the most gullible would give it credibility, at least after a bit of thought, excepting, of course, Yale's hysterical faculty and students. And reason number two, because there exists no real news, and never has been, against which the moon story could be judged. There's no real news that's free from distortion or bias, either in its presentation or omissions of facts, or its choice of what is or isn't deemed acceptable to cover. Well, that's it. Oh, wait a minute. Another point. The writer Edgar Allan Poe was hurt indirectly by this moon hoax. One of his stories got eclipsed by it. Nobody read Poe. They all were reading the New York Sun. But he got even by penning an even more incredible story, and he called it The Great Balloon Hoax. That's the word he used. Well, that story was really well put together, and it was read by a young writer-to-be named Jules Verne, who would go on to write From the Earth to the Moon, and later on Around the World in 80 days. So the moon hoax story gave birth, albeit indirectly, to a new literary genre, science fiction. Oh, second point, the New York Sun is famous for printing something else. It's a phrase that became famous. It was a 19th century meme, and it went like this: "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus." Words that, like the moon story, may prove to be a hoax, at least in the Christmas season of COVID 2021. That's all ET's got. Like and subscribe. Tap the bell icon to be notified of new uploads. Thank you.